Thank you so very much, Administrator Nolan, for being here. Families rely on the FAA to ensure their flights will take off safely and efficiently. The FAA's NOTAM system plays a critical role in this effort, and its recent outage is concerning, to say the least, as many of my colleagues have already said, and unacceptable. I think you know that. It doesn't just hurt passengers, it also poses a national security risk, signaling to our adversaries that even a minor computer error can bring down domestic commercial flights for hours. According to your testimony, this outage resulted from a contractor accidentally deleting files that were necessary to maintain the synchronization between the live and backup NOTAM databases. Administrator Nolan, as of January 10th, and if you could answer yes or no, I've got to go and vote. They're always doing multiple things around here, or we're always doing multiple things, I should say. Did FAA staff understand that deleting these files could cause this outage as of January 10th?
There was an understanding. If the question is, did they understand the result of deleting file? Yes, the administrator knew that it was an unintentional deletion. And so as they were working to repair that error, they did understand the magnitude of what they had done.
How many contractors had security permission to access and delete those files that day?
On that day, the contractors all had, let me say, our NOTAM system is overseen by the FAA and maintained by contractors. They were our database administrators. So they had access. The ones directly involved in this event on January 10th and 11th no longer have access to our system while the investigation is underway, and we're taking a look at that.
So how many had access that day?
That day, I don't have an exact number. That day, there were 2 people working in the system.
All right. So can you follow up with me and answer in writing?
Yes, sir.
How many contractors had access that day? How many contractors still can disrupt the database connection?
If we think about it, whether it's a contractor or an FAA employee, our goal is to build in a level of resilience no matter who is in the system, and we've put controls in place to make sure that we have the levels of redundancy with oversight, ensuring that 2 people, at least 2 people are there when working on the live database.
So you're saying the answer is 0 now?
That the answer is 0, I'm sorry?
The question was how many contractors still can disrupt the database connection? And you're saying to me that based on systems you've put in place now with redundancies, that answer is now 0? We
would expect, that's right, with oversight, we would not expect to see a repeat of this kind of error.
And thank you. If you'd follow up with the answer to the first question in writing. I believe it's essential that FAA avoid single points of failure, which I think I'm hearing you say that should not happen again. Right. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So no one contractor who hasn't had their morning coffee can accidentally or intentionally ground commercial air travel for the whole country. How many other single points of failure does the FAA have within its system?
That's a piece of work that we are undertaking. So part of the effort that we have going with our Office of IT and Technology, working with MITRE, is to assess the totality of our systems, of which there are thousands, to make sure what we have from a resilience perspective. And we expect that work to be completed here in the coming weeks.
So right now, we don't know how many other single points of failure we have within our system. And that's work you're doing right now.
That is work that we are doing now.
All right. What steps are you taking to audit security and access permissions across all of these points of failure to prevent both accidental mistakes and malicious intruders?
This is a part of what the investigation is designed to do. We're looking at every part of our process, from procedures, from access, from control, from resilience to redundancy. All of that is in scope of the investigation.
Well, obviously all of us were deeply troubled by what we witnessed, its impact on air travel, and the implications are deeply concerning. This year is, of course, FAA reauthorization. It's a good time for us to be focused on these issues, and I look forward to collaborating with you and with my colleagues as we modernize the FAA to increase security, to reduce risk, so that all of us certainly my constituents in Georgia and people all across the country can fly safely.
We appreciate the support.
So I guess, the chair is back.
Well, Senator Warnock, do you have?
Week, I invited Lacey Mason from the state of Georgia as my special guest at the State of the Union speech. She is a type 1 diabetic. She needs insulin to survive. Even with insurance, insulin was too expensive for her to afford, and she had to resort to black market insulin in the United States and borrowing expired insulin from friends. She told the story about meeting people she didn't know. She met on Facebook in parking lots to get insulin. And while I'm glad that my proposal to cap insulin at $35 per month for Medicare beneficiaries is now law, the fight is not over. There are still too many Georgians who aren't able to afford the insulin they need to live. Dr. Trish, do you agree that prescription drug prices like insulin are too high?
So that's there's a lot to unpack in that question. I think that insulin is an example where, it's a prime example really, where the list prices are particularly high and they've really increased over time in ways that harm patients at the pharmacy counter. The research that we've done at the Schaefer Center shows that the net prices that manufacturers receive has actually declined, although the total amount that we're spending when you account for what the PBMs and other intermediaries are taking home has not declined, right? So this is an example where it depends what price you're asking about, but it's absolutely problematic for patients, yes.
So in a sense, while it was important for us to have this cap, you're pointing to the larger root cause and the issues around PBMs. So related to that, and you point out the drug pricing is complex. That said, it's no secret that pharmacy benefit managers or PBMs have played a role in high drug prices, and that's what we are examining in this hearing today. How are PBMs contributing to high list prices for drugs, especially for insulin?
Absolutely. So they're essentially, PBMs are in a position where they make more money as the list price goes up, as they get a percentage of the rebate or some other type of fee that's based on that increasing list price. And so you've seen, even though insulin is a very highly competitive drug class, there's multiple products that exist there, and the rebates are enormous, typically more than half of the list price. But nonetheless, the pressures and the incentives have made it so that when manufacturers have opted to offer lower priced drugs, PBMs won't put them on their formularies.
So they're incentivized to be bad actors in this space, costing people like Lacey, literally.
Particularly when those patients face cost sharing that's based on the list price of the drug, then that's absolutely problematic for them, yes.
I agree. I think Congress needs to address the role that PBM rebates play in high drug prices. And that's why I was proud to vote the Pharmacy Benefit Manager Transparency Act out of committee last year and look forward to supporting it again this year. Dr. Oftebro, I don't want to butcher your name. My last name is Warnock. I get called Warlock and all kinds of things.
That was perfect.
Is it uncommon for pharmacists to see folks come in unable to afford their medicine?
Senator Warnock,
Speaking of insulin.
Senator Warnock, we see that every day. The out-of-pocket costs for patients, there's no way that it's not a barrier, and it's forcing patients to make very difficult decisions, whether they take their medicine, whether they ration their medicine, whether they don't take it at all. But it's clearly an unbearable impact.
Yeah, and in fact, a recent article on NPR says that manufacturers have increased the price of insulin by more than 600% over the last 2 decades. 600%, a drug that was created 100 years ago, the patent was sold for $1. Do you believe this leads to rationing? You pointed that out, or finding other ways for patients to drag out how long the medicine will last or refill. What kind of effects does this have on patients' health? Because I think as we work on the policy, we have to center real people. What's the impact on the patient?
Well, when a patient isn't taking their medication as prescribed, there are all kinds of negative impacts, but they're ultimately deteriorating health. They're using the healthcare system inappropriately, more ER visits, and these have cost all of us at that point.
So it costs them more and it costs us more.
Correct.
So thank you so much. Look, hearings like this are incredibly important, so we can come together and work to get something done for our constituents. And everything we do on drug pricing, it seems to me we have to center the patients because they are the ones who are really caught in the middle, and I hope we can get some progress. Thank you for everything you do on this front.
Thank you. Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you. Dr.
Senator Warnock, are you ready? I know you just walked in, so I want to give you a second if you're not.
Sure. Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Many of you have heard about the 4 Ps of Georgia: poultry, peanuts, pecans or pecans, that's how we say it in Georgia, and peaches. Well, I'd like to add a 5th P, plains. And with respect to my colleagues in North Carolina and Ohio and elsewhere, I would like to say that Georgia is the nation's most important aviation state. Georgia is home, after all, to the world's busiest airport, Atlanta Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. The state's top export is aerospace products, which also happens to be the state's 2nd largest manufacturing industry. So we're proud of that in Georgia, and it's an industry that's responsible for an economic impact of over $57 billion. Mr. Washington, as you know, the aviation industry has recently been plagued with a series of high-profile disruptions and dangerous near misses, including the NOTAM system outage, Southwest holiday meltdown that made Christmas not so happy for a lot of folks, and close calls on runways in New York, Texas, and California. Each of these instances threatens the safety and economic viability of the aviation industry, the success of which many Georgians and Americans rely on so heavily. If confirmed as FAA Administrator, how will you ensure the smooth and safe operation of airports and airlines across the country?
Thank you for your question, Senator. Running the 3rd busiest, not the 1st, but the 3rd busiest airport in the world, I can tell you that I'm acutely aware of the disruptions. These are serious events. When this occurred during the disruption, I immediately called for after-action reviews during the disruption. And my whole career is evolved around safety. And so I think we need to speed up the redundancy issues around NOTAM. I think we need to look at the other redundancy issues around the other systems as well and make sure we do not have one point of failure for these various systems. I agree with what the interim administrator called sort of a safety stand-down just maybe a week ago. I think that's needed, but this would obviously be one of my huge priorities.
And tell me a little bit about that. Safety, of course, is very important. Yeah. But some of the other issues raised by these incidents is just the issue of consumer protection.
Yes.
And how you make customers whole when these kinds of things occur. Have you, tell me about your thoughts around that, and what will you do to improve consumer protections for air travelers, making the experience more predictable and enjoyable, and so that users of the aviation space consumers don't feel like they've been taken for a ride that they didn't pay for.
Right. Thank you for the question, Senator. I think that responsibility, of course, lies in the Secretary's office, but I would work with him and the Secretary's office to make sure that consumer protections were covered. I spend every day at my airport in Denver talking directly with travelers, and I mentioned in my opening statement that as the disruption occurred during the holiday period, people didn't ask me, did I have direct aviation experience? They asked me where their luggage was. And so I will always be on the watch for consumer protection issues and working with the Secretary's office on that.
In the little bit of time I have remaining, I want to switch topics altogether. I introduced the Aviation Emissions Reduction Opportunity Act and the Sustainable Skies Act to establish a new grant program and tax credit to support the production and adoption of sustainable aviation fuel and other low-emission aviation technology. I think this is important to reduce harmful air pollution and to move our aviation industry toward a more environmentally friendly future. I'm glad that critical provisions from both of my bills were included in the Inflation Reduction Act, and while this is an important step, the widespread adoption of sustainable aviation fuels, there's still much more to be done. If confirmed, how will you work to reduce the emissions of the aviation sector in line with the President's goal of net zero emissions by 2050?
Well, let me just say, Senator, that SAF could be a huge game changer. We are on the front lines at Denver International Airport, and other airports are doing some really good things too. I point to San Francisco. The CEO out there is doing great things around SAF. I would want to ramp up to administer the grants that are out there, consistent with the Inflation Reduction Act. I noticed the National Defense Authorization Act, which includes SAF pilot programs, is out there as well, coupled and partnered with DoD agencies. And I know that some airports, including Seattle, is moving towards that. We are too. We'll see who gets there first in terms of the pilot program that's approved by DoD.
Thank you so much. I look forward to working with the FAA administrator to promote and expand sustainable aviation fuels. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much.
So very much, Madam Chair. Secretary Vilsack, welcome. Good to see you. Section 22007 of the Inflation Reduction Act provided, as you know, $2.2 billion for farmers who have suffered historical discrimination by the USDA. And this relief likely includes many black farmers in Georgia, farmers I know, like Lucius Abrams of Burke County, Carl Parker in Ashburn, who say that they are still in need of financial assistance for past discrimination. I run into these farmers from time to time across Georgia. The provision was signed into law last August, and USDA started distributing funds for economically distressed farm loan borrowers in October. Bill signed in August. Economically distressed farm loan borrowers began to see relief in October. It's currently March, and not a dime of financial assistance has gone out to farmers who face discrimination, right as they are entering another planting season again in the red. When I run into farmers like Lucius Abrams and Carl Parker, you know, I can't help but think of that old song by Sam Cooke, it's been a long time coming. And I've been waiting to say to them a change is going to come. But that change hasn't come. And the longer they wait, the deeper they're in a hole. Can I tell the farmers in Georgia who have been waiting for a very long time that USDA will start distributing this assistance?
Yes. As you know, Senator, we began the process of establishing and identifying a national administrator that will oversee this program and make decisions ultimately about who gets what. We've also established the process to begin establishing regional hubs that will help recover applications from folks who seek assistance. And we are working to get the word out that the cooperators that want to assist and help those hubs to identify themselves so that we're in a position to make sure that they are looped in to the process so that farmers across the United States who feel that they were discriminated against, who need financial assistance, will have an outlet, have a place where they can go, people they can talk to, they'll learn about the application process, they'll learn about the system for these hubs to accumulate these applications, to put them up with a national administrator. National administrator makes decisions. Our goal, as we've indicated, will be to try to get resources dispersed before the end of the year.
Before the end of the year, and you described this process, and you can imagine, I suspect, how this is heard in the ears of folks who've been waiting a very, very long time. And every single day matters. It's not as if they're standing still. It gets worse the longer it takes. And I just want to be able to say to these folks, look them in the eye and tell them that relief is on the way. Simple yes or no, will you commit to doing everything in your power to move faster to implement this program?
Yes.
And will you commit to providing my office in writing a timeline for outreach, application, decision, and the expected distribution of this financial assistance to the farmers? I think you said you expect to have it all delivered by the end of the year.
We have the resources out the door by the end of the year. That's the goal. Now, we don't know how many applications we're going to receive, Senator. Do you know how many applications we're going to receive?
Let me hear from you. I mean, we're...
Well, how many are we going to receive?
Well,
We're going to receive 30,000, 40,000, 50,000, 100,000, 200,000? We don't know. So the goal here is to try to make sure that we get information.
I would assume your agency and the folks who do this work would have done some research to have a sense of what the universe is.
We know from prior experience how many applications have been filed and how many people received compensation in Pigford, Keep Siegel, Love, Garcia. We know that universe, but we don't know if that universe is the only universe of people that will apply. And so we're planning on a significant number of applications coming in, which is going to obviously require some time. It's also going to require time. You can't just rush this from a standpoint of setting up the national administrator and then saying you've got 30 days to get the applications in. You've got to give people enough time to understand what the system is. From prior experience, we know this.
Yeah, and as I talk to Georgia farmers, they feel like they've been waiting really just to get some clear communication from USDA, which frankly they don't trust, about what's going on. And it's trust that we've got to work to rebuild. We've got to proactively communicate to these farmers who've been waiting on this financial assistance for a very long time. So let me ask you this. When was the last time you personally sat down with farmers who feel like they face discrimination at the hands of your agency?
2 or 3 weeks ago.
Okay. And you want to say anything about that exchange? Did people walk away with a clear sense of the process? Are you satisfied with your outreach?
Well, am I satisfied with the outreach? The outreach hasn't really technically begun because we have to get the national administrator and the hubs in place. But what we're doing now is basically asking cooperators, folks who want to be part of this effort to get information out about how you apply, where you apply, what information you have to provide, what the standards are going to be. We need to get that information out to folks.
All right. Do you understand that farmers feel like it's getting information from the USDA is like...
It's not coming from the USDA. That's the point of this. The point of it is we're going to have cooperators that these folks trust. We're going to give them information. We're going to give the hubs information. We're going to give the cooperators information, and then they're going to help us get information out. In addition to that, there will also be, no doubt, some kind of communication system involving ads in appropriate pages and all of that.
Right.
Okay, so there's going to be a lot of work to get information out in a variety of ways, and hopefully, folks, it will get to the people that absolutely are interested in this and feel that they deserve an opportunity.
Will you personally commit to hosting meetings with these farmers with you and your staff? Because at the end of the day, they're looking to you.
Well, I'm happy to visit with farmers, Senator, at any point in time. If you want to put a group of farmers together, I'm more than happy to visit with them. I've done that before, and you know that. You know that.
Well, I'm hearing from farmers that they're not clear about the process.
Well,
and when they can expect. Let me ask you this. Will you provide to my office in writing USDA's proactive outreach strategy for communicating with and updating farmers during the implementation of the process that we've discussed?
Sure.
All right. Thank you so much. And
Anytime you've asked for information, Senator, I've given it to you.
well, I'm not concerned about me. I'm concerned about the farmers who.
If I give it to you, I'm assuming you're going to give it to the farmers.
Who have been waiting for a very long time. And I think if you feel impatient, imagine how impatient they feel at this point. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, Senator Duckworth. As my colleagues on the committee have heard me say before, I believe Georgia is this country's most important aviation state. Georgia is home, after all, to Delta Airlines and the world's busiest airport in Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. According to the Georgia Department of Economic Development, aerospace products are both the state's top export and its second largest manufacturing industry, one that is responsible for an annual economic impact of over $57 billion. Most importantly, Georgia's aviation industry employs more than 108,000 people, spread across more than 800 different companies. But as we've heard today, there is a severe workforce shortage affecting our aviation industry, something that should concern all of us. Dr. Luty, what can Congress do to encourage the growth, the expansion, and development of the aviation workforce? And do educational institutions of all levels have a role to play here?
Most certainly, educational institutions play a critical role. So as we've heard, one of the key areas is making sure that everybody knows we're here and that aviation is a great field to consider, and not just pilots, but across the board, introducing young people to the many different careers in aviation. We can absolutely do that through the K-12 system by introducing curriculum at a very early age in grade school, make sure we keep students engaged with curriculum being introduced throughout. And then in the high school level, there's great high school programs that already exist, but also taking the opportunity to partner with colleges, universities, and technical programs for dual credit and other opportunities. So I think that segment plays a critical role in creating awareness of aviation careers to build the workforce for the future.
I agree, and we've got to foster a well-trained aviation workforce, which means we've got to invest in aviation education, and that starts, in grade school and beyond, which is why I fought to secure funding for Middle Georgia State University School of Aviation in last year's appropriations package, which they are using now to purchase a flight simulator to train more pilots at Georgia's only public flight school. That's also why I'm proud to be working on aviation workforce legislation to help more schools, including state and technical colleges, train students from rural communities, non-traditional communities to work in the aviation industry at a lower cost. We have to broaden the pool. I believe that the current workforce shortage presents a once-in-a-generation opportunity to revitalize our aviation workforce and industry from the ground up. We ought to see this not only as a challenge, but an opportunity. The entire education system has an important role to play in not just addressing this shortage, but also growing and supporting a modern and representative aviation workforce. We need all of our people to get to where we need to go. So the aviation workforce continues to lag behind other industries. There's no question about that. When it comes to recruiting workers from underrepresented backgrounds, which I propose contributes to the current workforce shortage. The vast majority of aircraft pilots, still the flight engineers, mechanics, technicians, all come from similar backgrounds. Conversely, a much smaller percentage of the aviation workforce come from low-income or rural communities, identify as women or as people of color. Mr. Spiro and Dr. Utash, would strengthening and expanding the pool of potential aviation workers help address the current workforce shortage? Yes or no?
Senator, thank you for the question. Yes. I would add, with regard to the FAA, it would be important to have those jobs available, which means that they need to staff that workforce and have the proper staffing models to identify what employees they need and how many.
Dr. Utash?
Absolutely, yes. The more females, the more underrepresented populations, people of color that we can get into this workforce will help solve the
So
problem.
those are not competing objectives.
No.
One actually facilitates the other,
That's correct.
correct? If so, what types of schools and training programs do you think are most likely to produce an aviation workforce that reflects our country?
So I would just point to something that we've just recently done that I think makes a big difference. We've created a Future Ready Center for juniors and seniors in high school from our largest school district in Wichita and largest school district in Kansas, actually. And those students are being able to begin their careers as juniors and seniors, and many of them are graduating with their high school diploma and their college, their WSU Tech certification and/or Associate of Applied degree at the same exact time. So coming in May, they will be graduates of both, and they're ready to be workforce ready at that point in time, particularly in manufacturing and aviation maintenance. Those kind of programs are the kind of programs that are really going to, advance the workforce. We're very fortunate in the state of Kansas that we have what we call a program in Excel and CTE, where our state is picking up the tuition for those high school students. So they come out with all of their preparation to go to work with no student loan debt. That's a great program. And then you look at driving that in. Our Wichita school system is full of underrepresented, a very ethnic, diverse population. So that particular program is meeting both an immediate workforce effort, reducing student loan, and also hitting on females and underrepresented populations.
Very good. Mr. Spiro, you want?
I have nothing to add with that. That was well said.
Great. So the aviation workforce development legislation that I'm working on right now will grow and strengthen the entire industry by educating and recruiting a vibrant and diverse workforce with emphasis on training tomorrow's aviation workers who are currently underrepresented in the industry. All of us have a stake in this. I look forward to working with the committee to ensure this year's FAA reauthorization includes critical workforce development provisions that further develop and sustain the industry. Thank you also very much for your testimony, and thanks to all of our witnesses for your participation today. It's headquartered in Atlanta, and it runs an extensive operation in Georgia that includes 1,700 miles of track, 600 bridges, 2,700 railway highway grade crossings, and a number of rail yards and transfer facilities in cities across the entire state, a multimodal state. That's a lot of Norfolk Southern rail in Georgia. And I can't help but see the accident in East Palestine and wonder what would have happened had we, instead of watching this in Ohio or witnessing this or experiencing it in Georgia. Mr. Shaw, can you give me and the people of Georgia confidence that we won't see an accident like this in Georgia?
Senator, thank you for the question. I'm terribly sorry for the derailment in East Palestine, and we're working every day to make Norfolk Southern and the rail industry safer. We've seen the preliminary results from the NTSB investigation, and we've made a number of enhancements to our own safety program in response. We've worked with industry to enhance safety and put in more safety features, and there are many aspects of the Vance Brown bill that we fully support to enhance rail safety. We are a safe railroad. The number of derailments on Norfolk Southern was the lowest last year that it's been in the last 2 decades. Senator Warnock, I'm fully committed to enhancing safety for Norfolk Southern and for the entire industry.
And that's good to hear, and the work that you want to do. Could you speak more specifically, what more needs to be done, in your view, to protect our citizens and our neighbors from accidents like this?
Thank you, Senator. We have announced that we are enhancing our hot bearing detector network. We're adding 200 hot bearing detectors to our network. We're piloting next-generation hot bearing detectors. We're working with the industry on best practices for safety. We are deploying more acoustic bearing detectors across our network, and we are installing a digital inspection portal that we are piloting with Georgia Tech outside of East Palestine to inspect passing trains and catch things that the human eye cannot catch. We will continue to invest in safety. We spend over $1 billion a year in capital on safety and over $1 billion a year in ongoing operating expenses.
Is there anything that you didn't have in place during this accident? And I know hindsight is 20/20 that you wish you had in place.
You know, what I can point you to is some of the steps that we're taking now based on the preliminary results of the NTSB investigation. I certainly look forward to fully cooperating with the NTSB throughout the full investigation and look forward to their results.
So I have to tell you, as I move across the state, and you and I have had a chance to talk, and we will keep that communication line open. But I have to tell you that as I move across the state and I talk to Norfolk Southern workers, I'm hearing from rail workers that policies around their working conditions are creating safety issues and may have contributed to this accident. Do you believe your company's worker policies contributed to this in any way?
Senator, our policies are there to promote the safety of train operations. I, too, have been fully engaged with our valuable craft colleagues. My first day as CEO, I went out into the field and I walked into the crew room, and I've engaged with our employees, and I've thanked them for their service to Norfolk Southern, their service to our customers, and their service to the United States. And since I became CEO, Senator, we've been on a hiring spree, and we now have 1,500 more employees than we did this time last year.
So how are you working with those employees and labor on any changes that you're considering? And what have you learned from the accident that might result in changes to your worker policies?
Senator, I'm committed to improving the safety culture at Norfolk Southern and throughout the industry, and I have reached out to the heads of our two largest labor unions and asked them for their assistance and their input on how we can advance safety at Norfolk Southern.
Great. Thank you so much, and I look forward to working with you and with labor and all of your colleagues to do everything we can and to make sure everything's being done to ensure the safe operation of our nation's rail infrastructure.
Thank you, Senator Warnock. It's been an interesting hearing, for sure. A lot of information, but I'd like to get some clarity.
Nice. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Many Americans, and in fact all of us, would remember the unfairness of 2008 and that crisis when bankers who made bad decisions, who played games with our economy, not only did they not go to jail, they got to keep their jobs and their multi-million-dollar salaries. I feel that in a particular way as someone who pastors and moves in communities where poor and marginalized people have the weight of the law come down upon them for the smallest of infractions. Not one banker went to jail, they kept their multi-million-dollar salaries. When bankers made risky bets that threatened our entire economy, they got to cash in. They should be held accountable. We discovered shortly after regulators took control of Silicon Valley Bank that top executives at the bank offloaded millions of dollars worth of stock in the weeks leading up to the collapse. Very convenient. Including their former CEO who sold $3.6 million worth of stock 2 weeks before the bank crashed. The Dodd-Frank banking reform law included a compensation clawback provision for executives identified as excessive risk takers, or in other words, those who put their banks and the entire economy in jeopardy. Mr. Gruenberg, the the FDIC, in conjunction with the other financial regulators, began working on a rule to implement this provision in Dodd-Frank in 2011 and then again in 2016, but a final rule was never issued. Does the FDIC have plans to revisit this rule?
It has been discussed, Senator, and it seems to me appropriate.
It's appropriate and I would say urgent. And I know that the Justice Department and the SEC are looking closely into this matter, and I would encourage them to include any evidence of insider trading. That seems only appropriate, given the circumstances. That should be a part of the scope of their probe. But there is a scenario where these executives not only get away scot-free, but also with sizable paydays. And the FDIC should use every tool it has at its disposal to prevent it. We certainly don't want to incentivize this kind of behavior. So again, Mr. Gruenberg, outside of this rule, tell me, where can Congress step in to stop incentivizing this type of high-risk behavior? Does the FDIC need additional legal tools to hold excessive risk takers accountable?
Thank you, Senator. First, as a matter of law, whenever a bank fails, the FDIC is required to conduct an investigation of the conduct of the board and the executives of the institution, and we have authorities under the law to impose accountability, including civil money penalties, restitution, and barring individuals from the business of banking. So we have significant civil authorities under the law now. It was mentioned earlier, and I think it's appropriate, that we do not have explicit clawback authority in regard to compensation. We can get at that issue through our existing authorities, but certainly providing explicit clawback authority under the Federal Deposit Insurance Act, as the FDIC has under the Dodd-Frank Act, would be appropriate, in addition to completing the rulemaking that you raised previously.
Now, both of these things are important. We've got to complete the rulemaking and look at and see whatever additional tools may be necessary. Certainly, as the ship is sinking, we don't want bankers to be able to move all of their products on a lifeboat.
I agree, Senator.
And so we've got to address this. I want to switch to a related topic. For several days, payroll providers banking with SVB or Signature Bank had no way to access their deposits. Everyday folks, leading to many Americans receiving their paychecks late or having missing paychecks. Too many Americans live paycheck to paycheck, and in this case, they got it late. And as a result, some of the 64 million Americans living paycheck to paycheck were hit with overdraft fees, non-sufficient fund fees due to the disruption, something I've addressed in other settings. And that's why I sent a letter with Senator Booker urging regulators to impose a temporary moratorium on overdraft and non-sufficient fund fees for folks who incurred these fees at no fault of their own. Mr. Gruenberg, does the FDIC have a plan surrounding overdraft and non-sufficient fund fee protections in the event that we experience broader systemic issues?
Senator, you raise an important question. We received your letter. As a starting point, we know there were delays. We really want to get the facts in terms of if overdraft fees were really imposed as a result of those delays. If we can confirm that information, then we can consider what actions to undertake. And we're glad to work with you and your staff as we follow up on that.
I look forward to working with you on this. Here's the bottom line. Ordinary folks who just showed up, put their deposits, they shouldn't have to bear the brunt and burden of these bad decisions made by bank executives.
Understood.
Thanks, Senator Warnock. Senator Daines from Montana is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. The failure of Silicon Valley Bank, Signature Bank, and the general turmoil in the banking sector are the direct result of the failures of regulators, including the
House launched the Sustainable Aviation Fuel Grand Challenge to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the aviation sector. And the goal of this grand challenge is to supply 3 billion gallons of sustainable aviation fuel per year by 2030 and 100% of expected domestic commercial jet fuel by 2050. That's the goal. But on Monday, the Government Accountability Office, the GAO, released a report showing that in 2022, sustainable aviation fuel accounted for less than 0.1% of the total jet fuel used by major U.S. airlines. So we don't seem to be rushing headlong in this direction, issues around China and others notwithstanding. Mr. Welch, based on this report, is the Biden administration currently on track to meet the sustainable aviation fuel targets it set 2 years ago?
Thank you, Senator. I think you point out very clearly that we have our work cut out for us. What I would say about the one on the GAO report, which provides a really good overview both of the current levels of production and challenges in scaling them up. The level of procurement in 2022 was around 16 million gallons, up from around 5 million gallons in 2021. So the absolute number is very small, but if we see a tripling in production, so if we see that trend going forward, we actually will get to the 3 billion gallon goal. Now, we really do have our work. There are significant barriers, and really the next step in terms of implementing the Inflation Reduction Act provisions will be a key influencer in kind of where we move from here. Thank you.
So we are seeing some improvement, but the goal was to get to 1 billion gallons of sustainable aviation fuel by 2018. 5 years later, we're not there, correct? So we have some way to go?
That's right.
So the Department of Transportation, the GAO recommended that the Department of Transportation coordinate with the Department of Energy and the USDA to develop performance measures that enable the agencies to better evaluate the effects of their actions and policies on sustainable aviation fuel production. How does the department plan to respond to this recommendation?
So thank you, Senator. We concur with that recommendation and fully agree on the establishment of performance measures to track the progress in that work. Having just received the final report, we're currently reviewing, and we will work with our partners to implement those specific recommendations.
Well, thank you so much. I think it's important that we continue to move in the direction of sustainable aviation fuel production. It reduces harmful air pollution, and at the same time moving the aviation industry toward a more environmentally friendly future, while at the same time spurring clean energy job growth and innovation all across our country. But this is only possible if the government fully commits to the goal that it set for itself. So I look forward to continuing that conversation, holding all of us accountable and keeping all of us honest and pushing our skies to a clearer and cleaner future. Thank you so very much.
Senator Schmidt.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Warnock, I did just want to underscore something, Mr. Carson. You said you can't insure your way out of a disaster. That's why it's so important that we be supporting these efforts to deal with the disasters, which means stopping the pollution going in the air. And that's why farmers and ranchers are so critical in all of this. So that's why we have additional money that's been put into ways that you can keep carbon in the soil instead of having it going into the atmosphere and creating all these storms and so on. So that's the reason we've been focused on that.
Thank you for those comments. I truly believe in my heart that the Farm Bill is not for farmers. It's for the hungry children and the underserved, that our U.S. population has a safe and steady supply of food. And so we've got to work hand in hand. And the Farm Bill is not for the farmers. It's for the American population.
It's for the country. It's for our national security. It's for a lot of things. So thank you. Senator Warnock.
Thank you so very much, Madam Chair. Georgia accounts for almost half of the peanuts produced annually in the United States. We're proud of that. That's more than 2 billion pounds a year. Producers of peanuts and other designated crops are eligible for the Marketing Assistance Loan Program. This program provides interim financing to producers so that commodities can be stored after the harvest. And then when market prices are typically low, and then sold later on when the market picks back up. But if the producers aren't able to sell their crops at that higher price, they have to forfeit their crops as collateral. So the stakes are always high for this program working right. Mrs. Thompson, does this happen to peanut farmers often, and are we seeing a lot of peanut crop forfeitures?
No, historically forfeitures have been very low. They're typically under 5%. And just to run through the past few years, in 2017 and 2018, they were around 3%, but those years crossed. In 2019, there were 0 forfeitures. 2020, it was 0.17%. In 2021, as of January of this year, there haven't been any forfeitures on record. That's the last data that we have.
Thank you. So I take that to mean that this is evidence that the marketing assistance loan program is working well for peanut farmers.
Yes.
And that's good to hear, and which is why I look forward to supporting this program in this year's Farm Bill. Nationwide, the cotton industry employs over 115,000 people, and it contributes more than $22 billion to the United States economy. Cotton is also a major economic driver in Georgia, with an estimated overall economic impact of $3 billion. The 2008 Farm Bill originally authorized Economic Adjustment Assistance for Textile Mills Program. Currently, EAATM provides 3 cents per pound of cotton to domestic cotton mills for capital improvements like new technology and equipment to help keep them competitive with foreign mills. Mr. Johnson, has this program provided stability in your estimation for the domestic cotton industry? And if so, can you talk about how that's happened?
Yes, thank you for that question. We do feel like that's been a very successful program. If you look back prior to 2008, the U.S. textile industry struggled for decades, and that has stabilized since that program was instituted in 2008. There's a great example of the success of that program in your home state. One of the most technologically advanced textile mills in the Americas is in Rabun Gap, Georgia, and the funds that are provided through that program allow mills to update their technology and equipment and make them more efficient. So it's been very successful, and we would love to see the full payment rate of 4 cents restored to continue that success.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because it is something, as you pointed out, that's created stability. And yet we did see that reduction in the 2012 Farm Bill. How do you think restoring that rate to 4 cents per pound, how would that affect the U.S. cotton industry?
Well, the textile industry is such an important industry for national security, and they also, I think that just bringing that payment rate back up to 4 cents would allow more efficiency, make the U.S. textile industry more competitive, and that's the goal. It's great to be able to take the cotton that's grown here in the U.S. and see it used in manufacturing here.
There's no question that these mills are major economic drivers in the state of Georgia. You see it up close in rural towns like Jefferson and Rabun Gap, and this program is vital to ensuring that these mills can remain competitive globally and that they can keep their doors open. And so I hope we can revisit that rate in this year's Farm Bill. I certainly will be doing everything I can to see to it that that happens.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator Warnock. And I believe that Senator Warnock.
Thank you so very much, Madam Chair. In 1919, President Woodrow Wilson described sanctions as an act that does not require force and would not, quote, he said, cost a life outside of the nation boycotted more than 100 years later, we know that the truth is more complicated than that. We know that this tool, although peaceful, in that it does not rely on the use of guns or bombs, still has severe consequences and can have a devastating effect on societies. In our globalized and connected world, sanctions on one nation usually affect others. Sanctions on a global economy like China, for example, would likely affect folks all around the world. And we know that these effects can last for generations. Ms. Rosenberg, how do you measure the effectiveness of sanctions in targeting decision makers and the ruling groups of nations?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. In measuring effectiveness, I think it's utterly essential to define the objectives against which you're measuring those particular sanctions. So, for example, with respect to our Russia sanctions, we've sought to do two things in particular: to deprive, to deprive Russia of the money and financial funds, and also of the battlefield equipment that it needs in order to fight its war. That is different than saying a goal would be to collapse an entire economy. We're quite focused, and so when evaluating the efficacy of these sanctions, you must measure it against what your goals are in the first instance. Now, one of the reasons why it's useful to have partnership with members of Congress and the administration is so that we can discuss together the goals of various sanctions authorities so that we can be aligned and working with common purpose, and then evaluating their efficacy against the objectives we have set out together.
So a kind of laser focus on the goal so as not to create consequences that cascade beyond what you're trying to do. At the same time, even with that kind of focus, with the world being so connected, there is the concern that this affects poor and working class folks in other countries, particularly with a global economy like China. How do you take all of that into account as you think about this?
Not just those concerns you mentioned, but other ones too that we must all be concerned with, like competitiveness of American businesses and institutions,
Sure.
And our ability to innovate and promote growth in our country, and of course those in our allies. These are exactly the right questions, and I think as sanctions policymakers, we must constantly be asking ourselves every time we implement a new sanction, will this have the desired purpose? Will it have unintended consequences? And seek to mitigate those unintended consequences at every step, before, during, if it occurs afterwards, to try and address them. We do that often using licensing or updating the authority.
Ms. Kindler, can you speak to how you think about this or considerations that you take into account?
Yes, Senator, I agree with your focus on these issues and share your concerns. When we impose export controls, we do so in a very calibrated and targeted way. For example, the advanced computing rule we put in place last October was focused on the most cutting edge of technologies, so as not to disrupt legacy technologies that have limited national security purpose. Our focus was on the cutting edge technologies that would most affect national security because of their use in artificial intelligence and supercomputing.
Thank you so much. We have to carefully consider innocent families and children and those without power when we use these tools, very, very powerful tools. The Commerce Department recently announced a collaboration with the FBI and the Department of Justice, a disruptive technology strike force to target illicit acquisition of technology assets by foreign adversaries like the Chinese government. This seems to follow in the footsteps of the Department of Justice's, quote, China initiative in 2018 to address potential economic espionage. DOJ ended that initiative, as you know, in 2021. Following criticism from civil rights groups that it targeted scientists of Chinese descent, and produced several prosecutions that actually ended in dismissals or acquisitions. As DOJ officials acknowledged, the department heard from members of the scientific community that targeting scientists over sometimes minor research grant infractions could, quote, lead to a chilling atmosphere for scientists and scholars that damages the scientific enterprise in our country. I've been hearing from a lot of folks in my state on this, Georgians of Chinese descent, including scientific researchers at some of our universities, about the climate of fear around any engagement with China, even lawful interaction. Mr. Axelrod, as Commerce begins this new initiative to target espionage by the Chinese government, which is a serious threat, which we have to engage, what steps have you taken to address civil rights concerns and any actual or perceived targeting of scientists of Chinese descent?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Senator, because you've hit on two critically important things. One is to take action against the threat from the PRC, which is why we've established the Disruptive Technology Strike Force with the Department of Justice. And then a second is to make sure that Chinese Americans or people of Chinese descent who are here studying or working in the United States are not targeted and do not feel targeted. And I believe one thing we've done in that regard, separate from the strike force, which is really more focused on things happening in PRC, is our establishment of an academic outreach initiative. Because in the academic community in particular, it is essential that we both safeguard sensitive research, but also at the same time maintain that open collaborative environment so that we have people from foreign countries coming here to help contribute to the research and development that is sort of the hallmark of our academic setting. And so we've worked, we identified 20 universities in particular that we thought were maybe at higher risk from foreign countries, and we are working with them and partnering with them to what's on really a shared endeavor, which is to protect their research community and protect their research from forces abroad that would seek to obtain it.
I have much more here, but thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Warnock.
I think you all might be aware that Georgia is known as the peach state, but climate change is threatening to put our state fruit at serious risk. This year, Georgia experienced a very mild winter, and then we got a late freeze. And this combination, kind of a 1-2 punch, wreaked havoc on our peaches. And experts from the University of Georgia estimate that 90% of Georgia's peach crop failed, 90%. Mr. Wingard, I know that South Carolina and some of the other southeastern states where you work grow a lot of peaches and other specialty crops similar to Georgia. Can you describe how the changing climate has affected production in the southeastern United States?
Thank you, Senator. I don't do any peaches. I'm a leafy greens guy, but I'll tell you what I know, and it's not much. They are struggling with climate change, or they're struggling with different patterns of weather, and we too have seen a significant decrease in peaches. I think our number's in the 60–70% decrease or loss. I think that can be addressed a little bit through some research. It's a long process to fix because peaches are about 3 or 4 years before you ever, peach trees are about 3 or 4 years old before you ever pick a peach. But there is a lot of research going on peaches. Dr. Worthington and I were discussing it before the hearing, and I think peaches and other crops that are affected by climate change can be bred to adapt to a new climate. I spoke earlier in my written comment, in my oral comments about the East Coast Broccoli Initiative, and that's essentially what that was about, is to get broccoli varieties bred that are adapted to the climate in the eastern U.S. as opposed to the southwestern U.S. I think research is the answer to that.
And we will only see continued climate change. That's not going away, sadly. And it will continue to cause uncertainty for growers, so research is important. But also, as we get the research, we've got to be nimble in our policy approach because the research isn't going to help us much if we're not able to apply it to our practices. So in 2021, Georgia produced 130 million pounds of peaches valued at $85 million. So when these crops fail at this large of a scale, it affects the producer. But we need to remember that the local economy also takes a hit. And so as we reauthorize the Farm Bill, Do you or anyone else on the panel would like to speak to this? Do you agree that our crop insurance programs need to be updated to better reflect the realities of climate change and avoid ad hoc disaster programs?
Yes. I think it's really important to recognize that if we're not talking about the root causes of climate change, and industrial agriculture being second as a root cause of climate change, we're doing a disservice to the discussion here today. So, technology is going to help us continue to adapt, but we can only adapt so far. There's a thin layer of the atmosphere and a thin layer of the soil that provides life to us humans on the planet, and we really need to engage in the practices to mitigate the effects of industrial agriculture and really transform the food system for all of our benefit.
So we need to give our growers the tools in order to manage the actual risks that they're facing, which has implications not only for them, but for our economy. When I meet with Georgia growers, one of the issues they consistently bring up are the lack of options they have for managing risk. And one program they've come to rely on is the Tree Assistance Program, or TAP. TAP allows producers to replant bushes, trees, or vines that produce an annual crop loss due to natural disasters. Currently, the program does not allow producers to replace their damaged plants with improved varieties that are more resilient to disease or environmental changes and may even provide higher yields. Mr. Wingard, can you describe the challenges that this creates for producers, and is this something you think we should address in the Farm Bill or anyone on the panel?
Well, I'm not a peach farmer, and I don't do any trees, but I do think it makes sense that if you have trees or vines or bushes that are damaged, and you have more suitable or improved varieties to replace them with, yes, it makes sense to replace them, and it makes sense
and not to be
help.
forced to replant the trees that you know are not going to work. Right?
That's correct, and you should do it before. You should do it. And in my opinion, you should do a little bit along the way, so you don't have to wait and do a large part of it at one time.
Okay. Thank you. I'm out of time, but I look forward to exploring ways we can make these kinds of technical changes in the Farm Bill that will improve the prospects of growers and our economy. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Senator from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to call up my amendment, Warnock 12. And thank you for your work on this critical legislation. I agree that we must address the opioid epidemic. That is clear. It's claimed thousands of lives in Georgia and all across the country. However, we have lived with the war on drugs for decades. Rather than reduce illegal drugs in our communities, we've actually declared war on many of our communities themselves. I've seen the impact of this up close as a pastor, as a member of the community. The United States of America, the land of the free, as a result of this misguided approach, is the mass incarceration capital of the world. And it stems in large part from our failed war on drugs. It's been a war on these communities. And so while I believe that we must fund law enforcement, which is at the front lines of illegal trafficking, I also believe that we must fund treatment, recovery, and diversion programs for those suffering from substance use disorder. And that's why I'm offering a simple amendment that would broaden the permissible uses for any forfeited funds to include funding for the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services administrations. It doesn't remove any eligibility for law enforcement, but by expanding the uses of this funding, it allows the federal government to take a more holistic approach to this problem. And it would allow the funds to curtail the demands for drugs and work to mitigate the damage caused by opioids to our communities. While I understand this amendment is outside the scope of the Banking Committee's jurisdiction, today I will vote to advance this bill with the hope that the chair and the ranking member will commit to working with me to address this important issue for our communities as this bill progresses to the floor. with great concern for these issues, which I'm committed to continuing to work on, and hopefully the chair and the ranking member will work with me, I will withdraw my amendment. Thank you, Chair. I yield back.
Thank you. That was the next question. I'm going to yield to Senator Warnock.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and congratulations to the nominees. Here today, we have before the committee 3 outstanding and historic nominees to the Federal Reserve who are all eminently qualified to apply their efforts to abide by the Fed's dual mandate to maximize employment and manage inflation. They will further help the board reflect the diversity of our great nation and are also all ready to maintain the safety and the soundness of our financial system. Georgia banks are sound in terms of their expertise to lend to their communities, but they're having to carefully navigate higher rates and maintain consumers' or customers' confidence following the failures of banks in other parts of the country. With higher interest rates and tightening credit conditions, small businesses especially are having trouble finding loans to help fund their growth. Meanwhile, the giant banks are spending billions on buybacks, while their consumer and small business banking revenue has sharply increased, taking money straight from Georgia's communities and delivering it to their wealthy shareholders. Dr. Cook, what actions is the Federal Reserve taking to ensure small businesses are not facing needless restraints on credit?
Thank you so much for your question, Senator, and it was a pleasure to speak with you in your office yesterday. The way we approach financial stability is to think about the optimization problem, as any economist would, and the trade-offs associated with optimizing supervision and regulation. Certainly, we don't think that community banks, for example, should be burdened with the kind of regulation that you might see for larger banking institutions. And those are the ones that typically fund small businesses. And this is why I am particularly concerned about the bank stress that has been concentrated among the regional banks that typically fund small businesses, for example. So what we're doing in terms of financial stability is to monitor very closely the ongoing effects of bank stress and making sure to monitor and making sure that the system stays sound and resilient. And I am a big supporter of the diversity of the financial system, the diversity and sizes of financial institutions. And community banks especially have deep roots in their communities and know their clients very well. So I think that's the major way that the Federal Reserve is supporting small businesses and small institutions.
I think you're right about the importance of community banks, and just to push a little more, so what support has the Federal Reserve provided small lending institutions in the wake of these collapses?
We are reviewing, as a part of Vice Chair Barr's holistic review of not just capital standards, but also this review that was already published of SVB, to learn the lessons of the failure of SVB. So I think that's one of the major things, and then to translate that into concrete steps, and that's what we're doing. So I sit on the subcommittee on smaller regional banks and community banks, and we are actively discussing the ways in which we learn the lessons and make sure that this monitoring is happening so that that part of the financial system and all of the financial system stays sound and resilient.
Thank you so much. Dr. Kugler, how would your experience at the World Bank inform your work on the Federal Reserve Board to support small businesses?
Thank you for that question, Senator Warnock. You know, it's interesting because just like we're experiencing inflation today here in the US at alarming levels, that inflation is even higher if you look at around the world. Inflation in a place like Lebanon is 200%. Inflation at a place like Zimbabwe is 60%. 50% in Argentina, 35% in Turkey. So you see it throughout the world in different regions, and it's certainly much more pronounced everywhere else in the world. These are issues I have had to work with. On the other side, the recovery from the pandemic was something that I also worked on at the World Bank, and I have worked on at the World Bank. And part of that help was not only helping households, but it was helping small and medium-sized businesses recover from the pandemic or stay afloat through the pandemic so that the private sector could thrive. And when the time came to get out of the pandemic that was so painful to all of us throughout the world, then the private sector could continue to hire those households and workers that very much needed that help after the pandemic. So I have worked both on the recovery side as well as on the inflation side more recently, which just like here in the US was experienced because of supply chain disruptions, because of people withdrawing out of the labor force, and all of these exacerbated by Russia's war on Ukraine. So that has been felt even more in other continents, in other parts of the world, and I have worked very actively on all of those important issues, in particular in terms of supporting small and medium-sized businesses.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.